Hey guys, it's Richie the WizKid here from the Best Darn Diddly Review Show, and I'm here to talk to you about PopThreads.com, your number one source for finding awesome nerdy t-shirts. Are you sick from not knowing what to wear when you go out with all your friends on the weekends? Well, don't have a cow, man. Go to PopThreads.com, and if you use the code Simpsons at checkout, you can save 15% on all your t-shirt needs.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as MrMostDaysOff, and joining me once again, through thick and thin, your co-host with the most, Richie the WizKid. How are you today, Rich?
Oh, I guess I'm being stretched a little thin with all this talking with you still. It's like we got 10 more years of this to go?
How many years? Do you mean of the podcast? Or
yeah, I mean of the
Simpsons?
podcast, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, God, no.
I was like, dude, it's 25, 24. They're not done yet, so it's hard to say for certain.
Don't you start talking before I throw it back to you. The man, the myth, the menace. It is Miles.
Menace to society.
No, just menace like Dennis.
Gotcha.
A little more Bart Simpsonian or itchy and scratchiness.
I like it. Well, today, sir, we are talking about an episode that I think is very reflective in a weird way of our friendship. I'm sure we'll get into here in a bit, but we are talking about Itchy and Scratchy the Movie, which debuted all the way back on November 3rd of 1992. And right off the bat, Richie, we don't even have to get to the chalk gag, because I've already got a fun fact from the director's commentary just about the air dates. At this time, Fox decided that they wanted a show to run on Tuesday night against the election, because they figured no one's going to want to watch the election results, Rich. I mean, that would be boring as hell. No, that doesn't really affect anybody's day-to-day life, so who would want to tune in for something like that, right? So they decided they were going to pull The Simpsons from its normal Thursday night slot. So they decided they were going to pull The Simpsons from its normal Thursday night spot to move it to Tuesday night to run against the election, and despite this being a phenomenal episode, it got about 80% of its usual viewers, which I think is actually pretty damn impressive if you think about putting it up against the election and still retaining 80% of its normal audience.
And I think all the smart people are on the writing staff of The Simpsons and all the dumb people are the bigwigs behind Fox.
Exactly. I think that's a running gag in their show, actually.
You don't say.
So the chalk gag on this one was actually one of two we'll get to, but this one was I will not bury the new kid. And the couch gag was they all jump onto the couch. Turns out it's inflatable and it deflates right underneath them. Also want to point out, we haven't done one of these in a while, but according to the director's commentary, this is the first appearance of Bumblebee Man.
Oh, wow. I didn't even notice that. I mean, I saw him. I remember him being in the episode, but I didn't realize it was the first time.
I was starting to the reason I put that little caveat of according to the director's commentary is I was going to talk to you about that. I could have sworn I remember seeing him on the show already, but now that I say that out loud, I cannot think of a single episode in which he would have appeared on.
Yeah, it's... I guess we're just so far into it that we already forget people and things and...
Well, I'm going to trust Mike Reese and Al Jean on this one. They claim it's his first appearance, and by golly, I believe them. So, first appearance of Bumblebee Man.
By golly gosh.
This episode starts out with something that I know is near and dear to your heart, and that is Star Trek. In this case, Star Trek 12. So very tired.
And we get that great Shatner-esque soliloquy at the beginning of the episode. Captain's log. Stardate 6051. Had trouble sleeping last night. My hiatal hernia is acting up. The ship is drafty and damp. I complain, but nobody listens.
I think it's kind of neat that Hank Azaria was actually providing the voice for both Captain Kirk and Sulu in that scene. So he was having an awesome conversation with himself, impersonating two very famous Star Trek celebrities.
Yeah, you could tell it wasn't Shatner, but I didn't realize it was Hank Azaria doing it. That just makes me... I'm always in awe with what he can do with his voice.
I'm always in awe when voice actors can have a conversation with themselves and pull off two different parts in the same scene. with the different voices. It makes me think all the way back to oh shit, what's his name? Billy. The
Billy
guy who
West?
ended up doing both Ren and Billy West. He ended up after the debacle that happened with the creator of Ren and Stimpy. Billy West actually took over the part of both Ren and Stimpy, so he was doing both voices a lot of the times, and I can't imagine how many years that took off of his career just screaming at Stimpy all the time, but it was always impressive to me, and this is in that same light. I always like it whenever a voice actor is capable of doing that. I think it's a really cool skill that he has. I also want to point out that the Star Trek movieverse did in fact get to 12 movies in 2013, but it was not with the original cast. It was in fact the reboot Star Trek Into
there's
Darkness.
There's one original cast member in it.
Oh, good point. Good point. Is sadly his last appearance.
Good old Leonard Nimoy.
Indeed. Turns out, though, that tonight's the night of the parent-teacher conference, and the kids are going to be babysat by Grandpa, who's already fallen asleep at this time before the Simpsons' parents even leave. Already, Homer is laying down the law because when the kids ask him what's for dinner, he replies, well, if you're good, pizza. If not, poison. And then I love this little bit where Bart starts going into, like, what if one is good, one is bad? Or Lisa actually says, what if one is good, one is bad? And Bart's like, poison pizza. And my favorite, Homer is like, absolutely not. I'm not making two stops.
No, I'm not making two stops.
Classic Homer.
But then even more classic Homer here in the next scene when him and Marge are in the car. He knows how to do the parent-teacher conferences.
Dibs on Lisa.
That's pretty much what he says. No, this is how it was last time. And he goes, okay, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 50. And Marge goes, is it 37? Joe! I mean, to know.
And when he does finally get his way, he starts honking and cheering USA, USA while driving down the interstate. Classic Homer. They arrive at the elementary school where the banner on the front door says, let's share the blame. I thought that was really funny. I also really dug that Homer immediately, after, of course, sucking his fat in so he could actually fit into Lisa's desk, when Miss Hoover's back is turned, he actually starts making armpit farts, which is something that Hoover usually doesn't have to deal with from at least the Simpson family, but this is a special night for her.
To be fair, I think it's actually smart to make Marge go to the Bart conference. Because if you send Homer in by himself, like, is anything really going to change? And if it does change, it's going to go to, like, a massive extreme. So if I was Marge, I would be like, it's probably best if I go to Bart's conference.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the responsibility factor, Lisa's conference is kind of a piece of cake. Totally. In fact, it's a very good point because when we see Marge in the next scene with Mrs. Krabappel, Mrs. Krabappel not only pulls out an entire tray of contraband, including a Krusty the Clown doll that's actually secretly a knife, and a pretty, like, nasty-looking knife, too. It's not like a little, like, Swiss Army knife deal. It's like a... knife. Yeah, it's a big deal. She also starts mentioning some of the various things Bart's been up to, such as creating a laxative out of his peas and carrots. And my favorite, replacing Mrs. K's birth control with Tic Tacs.
That's the dirtiest prank of all.
That's awful, dude. Also, Mrs. K has a witness lined up, which is a little bit unorthodox for a parent-teacher conference, she admits, but this is a special case. She actually brings a doll out and asks the kid that comes in the room to show on the doll where Bart put the firecracker, which is another just pretty dark joke. Did you ever play around with firecrackers when you were a kid?
Very little. There was this asshole that I was a roommate with at college for a little while that used to want to take a golf club and hit firecrackers at each other.
I also like Roman candle fights and all sorts of other.
I never mentioned you by name.
I'm not embarrassed of that. I'd challenge anybody who wants one to a Roman fight.
A Roman fight, huh?
To a Roman candle fight right now. Yeah, that's a whole different thing. No, but a Roman candle fight, I am game for right now. I did, in fact, have a firecracker blow up in my hand once when I was a kid, like just like a black cat, and it wasn't too bad, but I did get like blood blisters all over my fingers. Ooh. It was pretty nasty. It reminded me, though, the doll, it reminded me of a story, and I hope this is like schoolyard urban legend, but I had heard story of a bully when I was a kid who essentially put a firecracker in both of their ears, both of their nostrils, and in their mouth, and lit them all while holding them down. And that story, even though I think it was kind of fabricated, it always visually stuck in my mind. Anytime I'm playing with fireworks, that image pops into my mind, and it gives me just an awful sense, because that would be just the most terrifying fucking feeling to contend with ever.
No, I do remember playing with one of my friends with his G.I. Joes, where we'd like light a smoke bomb and leave it on top of the G.I. Joe and whatnot. Everyone fucked around with G.I. Joes.
Yeah, like Sid from Toy Story, you monster.
Yeah. The only thing I really remember doing is there was a time where Taco Bell did Star Wars toys whenever they re-released all the movies and updated the graphics the first time. And I had this Boba Fett that was like, there's a little triangle, and then you set Boba Fett on the triangle, and he would like balance on it, just on like he was in a flying position horizontally, and you could put like his head on the top of the triangle, and he would balance on it. And I had this great idea after my buddy and I built this model rocket that we would strap Boba Fett to the rocket and then light the rocket and it would let it take off. And all the rockets were so simple to make, so they'd always go straight up in the air. But this thing was so
not
heavy.
If you counterweight it.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, we counterweighted it. And I had a cast at the time on my ankle, so I couldn't really run. And I'm telling you, this thing went up in the air for like maybe half a second, and then it completely turned horizontally and went straight at me. I was hobbling away from it.
I would have blocked it with the cast, personally.
It missed me. It ended up like flying around all crazy. It ended up in some random person's backyard. And like when it started, we were in the middle of a field behind our middle school. I had to send my buddy over the fence to get it because I had a cast around my ankle. Usually I was the one that would do all that, but I just remember fearing for my life for a split second because this rocket was coming straight for me.
Well, while all of these horror stories of fearing for your life are coming from Bart's class, Homer, meanwhile, is being praised on his parenting skills. Clearly, with somebody as smart as Lisa, Homer must have been reading to her from a very young age, and this flashback sequence is fantastic because he's like, I did read to her as a young age. It flashes back and you see Homer reading the TV guide schedule to Lisa when she's on his lap.
With Mr. T on the cover.
Yeah, it was. I pity the fool. I pity the fool, Homer says, that doesn't abide by the 3 R's of the TV guide. That's reading the TV guide, writing to the TV guide, and renewing the TV guide.
Close enough. I actually like the part where it flashes back to Mrs. Krabappel's room. And I don't know why. I've always enjoyed this. I love the fact that she's the one that says, we got to get Bart on the right path because Bart could become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And I'll get into this at the end of the episode here, but like she's the one that first says it, and this is a reoccurring thought for Homer and Marge both throughout this entire episode.
Well, and it just like on a bigger picture scale too, like this in my mind to some extent connects back to when Bart got an F, the opening of season 2. There is a hidden passion inside Edna Krabappel where every once in a while she'll get a glimmer of hope from one of her students. Most of the time we see it as Bart, of course, because of their relationship, but she'll just go from being this kind of like just burnt out school teacher who really doesn't get paid enough to care, and just every once in a while you see these moments where it's like, oh wow, she actually is invested in Bart's future. I mean, like that exists in her, even if it's not always immediately on the surface.
True dat.
I mentioned the second chalk gag earlier, and one of the things Marge has to do during her visit with Edna is she has to write on the chalkboard, I will try to raise a better child. Marge also mentions, though, during this meeting that Bart isn't a bad kid and he's not looking for trouble. It just seems to find him. However, at this exact moment we see at the Simpsons' home, Bart is, in fact, looking for trouble when it's over the lip and through the gums. Here comes Grandpa's teeth, I believe it was, but he essentially steals his grandfather's dentures and then has a grand old time doing all sorts of zany shit with them. Bow now. Bow now.
Oh, that's going to be stuck in my head all day now.
Oh, one last thing. Sorry to jump back on it, but I did want to point out, I think we forgot to mention that Edna was saying that Bart would become a Chief Justice if the parents, Homer and Marge, started enforcing discipline upon him. If they didn't, however, his future was most likely going to be as Bang Bang Bart, the out-of-shape stripper.
It's the creepy part is that Marge is the one that fantasizes, or not fantasizes, has a little image in her brain.
Dude, it made me think of Meredith from The Office. If you guys watched the finale of that show, during the finale, when they hire a stripper for the bachelorette party, it ends up being Meredith's like high school dropout son, and she's super supportive, like, "Oh, good job, honey, you work those cheeks to earn them tips," and it's just super awkward because she's such a supportive mom in such an unconventional way. But Marge is definitely more in tune with the Chief Justice Bart than the Bang Bang Bart, I would say is an easy assumption.
I don't know. She was daydreaming about Stripper Bart, but not about Chief Justice Bart.
They're on their way home. Like I mentioned, Bart is going haywire. He's actually like spinning around on the ceiling fan, which is actually a really dope shot, one that I remember very clearly as a kid. You see the room going around quickly in a circle. He's biting records, which I learned from the commentary was apparently something that college kids did in like the 1950s. I'm not really sure much more about that. That was a quote from the director's commentary. They were mimicking part of some subculture of people that decided this was a good idea.
It's a terrible idea.
I guess. I guess people are bored in the 50s. But it just seems wasteful to me. I would never like crack CDs in half on purpose.
Nowadays, a lot of those vinyl records could be worth money, but like when you're biting a record, like it's going to shatter into pieces, and some of those are going to be sharp.
Cut you.
Like that's one thing that's terrible. I mean, they use them to kill zombies in Shaun of the Dead, for goodness sakes.
It's probably something that people do in college, like, I don't know, jumping off of a balcony just for the sake of being an idiot. But a balcony, yeah.
In a Speedo. Twice.
Well, I got a feel for it the first time. I wanted to see if I could get it down right the second time.
To make sure that all the neighbors saw, not just the ones right next to us.
Hey, I think if I would have gone for 3, we could have had the fire department on hand. Oh, well.
So Bart's the best child ever, swinging on a fan.
Bart actually hears his parents come home and immediately goes into panic mode, but unfortunately he acts just a little bit too abruptly because he ends up smashing his grandpa's dentures. He quickly balls them up and tapes them together and shoves them back in his grandpa's mouth and has just enough time to grab the closest book nearby and pretend to be reading when his parents walk in the door. I love his reaction when he's all like, "Oh man, time flies when you're reading."
The Bible?
The Bible? Oh!
And it was upside down too.
Yeah. Grandpa immediately starts complaining about how terrible a child Bart is, and immediately Homer starts defending Bart. Abe says, "Bart stole my teeth." Homer actually kind of makes fun of his father at this point because he's like, yeah, Dad, you're always saying things like that. Bart stole my teeth. The nurses are taking my money. That thing on my neck's getting bigger. But Marge uses this opportunity to correct Homer and realizes this is one of the opportunities to discipline him that Mrs. Krabappel was talking about. So they send Bart to bed with no dinner. Bart isn't convinced that it's going to stick. He actually says he'll have pizza in his room in 5 minutes.
I love the response to that, though. But when Bart's like, "Yeah, right, I'll be eating pizza in 5 minutes." And Marge goes, "Bart, stop being confident." Marge doesn't always get those kind of lines in there. And like, I don't remember that one at all. But I was cracking up when I heard her say that.
That was a good one. Well, a couple hours actually end up going by, and Bart's getting quite hungry. I was a little bit concerned that it only took a few hours before he starts looking at his dog and envisioning it as a piece of pizza. But that's where he's at. Bart is audibly complaining from his room, and Homer's reaction is to start running to his aid, food in hand, but Marge keeps reminding him, "No, Homer, you can't do that." And at the point where Bart is about to call it a night and give up and realizes, man, I can't believe it. They actually punished me. I better start acting right and getting my shit together. At this very moment, Homer sneaks in Bart's room and says, "Here's some pizza, boy. Don't tell your mother. Just promise me that you're going to do right from now on." To, of course, which Bart says, "I promise, Dad."
I was like, well, it just sucks because, like, you're not mad at Homer for what he does there. You're like, oh, he really cares about Bart here. And he's been sticking up for him the whole time. Like, you feel that connection, and then as soon as he closes the door and Bart laughs and says "sucker," you're just like, ugh.
I'm not a parent. I know you're not a parent either. I'm an uncle. I love my nephews. And the great thing, though, is I only have to be the fun guy. I never have to really be the disciplined guy, or very rarely, and only for very minor things. So this is hard for me to identify with, but I could totally see trying to, put myself in perspective. Like, if I had a nephew who was upset and hungry and wanted food, I would totally want to just go get him a bite to eat and not have to have him feel all sad and stuff. And I imagine as a dad, it would be really difficult to not cave into those simplistic desires that don't seem like any big deal. But as we know, punishment and discipline is an important part of child development to some extent. I mean, there's different schools of thought, but everybody agrees that some form of discipline is necessary.
Spank that ass.
I don't know how you meant that, but it made me uncomfortable. The sad part about this whole encounter, though, is right after Bart makes that promise and Homer leaves the room, Bart instantly goes into kind of mischievous mode, and you hear him say, "Sucker."
Yes, that is what I said.
We then cut to the next day, and a TV ad pops up for a new movie coming out, Rich. This
what?
movie...
Terrence and Phillip, Ashes of Fire?
This one, it has suspense. It has romance, Richie. It is none other than the Itchy and Scratchy movie. Now, and it's going to have 53% new footage.
Oh, so exciting.
I can't wait, right? And Bart and Lisa are probably the most excited two people in all of Springfield, even though everybody is lined up to see this movie quite literally later on in this episode. Right away, almost instantly after we see Bart enjoying this preview, Homer comes in and asks him if he took out the garbage like he was told to. Bart says he did, but when Homer walks into the kitchen, it's an absolute filth to the point where goats are actually in their kitchen eating off of the floor. Homer decides Bart needs to be punished, but Bart brings up the fact that if he punishes him, he's going to have to think of things and do stuff. Or instead, he could just watch some surprising daytime Mexican television. And this is where we get that first appearance I mentioned earlier of none other than Bumblebee Man. And of course, Homer is delighted with this idea, so Bart just goes and plays with Milhouse instead.
Run along, you little scamp.
Next up is the unveiling of the Itchy and Scratchy the Movie billboard, and I love that it actually has Itchy decapitating Scratchy, complete with real blood spilling out onto the roadway. Particularly funny when a newlywed couple comes by, gets drenched in blood, the bride does, and then they just laugh it off because they're so excited about Itchy and Scratchy.
Yeah, they look angry, and then they look up and see the billboard, and then they're like, "Oh."
Back at home, Bart Simpson is literally hammering mustard packets to the tune of Jingle Bells, and when Homer asks him why he's doing that, he simply replies, "I don't know." Homer knows at this point Bart definitely needs to be punished, but just then, the ice cream truck comes by and he's distracted. He actually butts to the front of the line to get him and Bart ice cream, pushing the other children out of the way, saying he was here first.
It looked like Bart was enjoying some kind of chocolate one, and Homer had were those bottle rockets. I was never able to eat the
bomb pops. Bomb pops. They're the bomb.
Red, white,
and pun intended. They are absolutely the bomb. They also did the chocolate banana versions of them, where it was chocolate top and bottom with banana in the middle, and those are even better.
I love there in that scene when they're eating it on the sidewalk. Homer's like, "What were we talking about?" And Bart was like, "You're telling me how to get out of jury duty."
Oh yeah, all you got to do is be prejudiced against all races. Great advice. And once again, Homer forgets to punish Bart. When Marge gets home, though, it's finally reached its limit because Bart is pulling up the carpet. And I love this little tie-in, though, because when Marge asks Homer, why is he letting Bart do that? We get the same response that Bart gave earlier. I don't know.
Runs in the family. Is Homer influencing Bart, or is Bart influencing Homer?
Well, they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Yeah, but the way that they do it's just clever to me, where it's just like, I feel like it's Bart influencing Homer a lot of the times, which is backwards, but that's why it's Simpsonian. Then is this where we get the news report with Kent Brockman?
Yes, live from the Korean animation studio where the Itchy and Scratchy movie is being made. And a real life tie-in here, at the time, The Simpsons actually used an overseas animation studio, and they were offended to the point where they almost refused to draw the scene. They actually had to be convinced that they were just basically at the point where they were just going to send it back to The Simpsons and say, animate it yourself because this is offensive to us. But they ended up getting it done.
I can understand that. Like, I absolutely can understand why you wouldn't want to draw that, but at the same time...
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me as well. I can understand why you'd be offended, but it's still a pretty funny joke. It's set up like the animation studio is basically like a sweatshop. Like these people are being held at gunpoint and shit.
That's probably how they sold it, where they said, no, this is an over-exaggerated caricature.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know how she could sell that.
And then Kent Brockman goes into the history of Itchy and Scratchy, all the way back to the Happy Cat where Scratchy came from, but probably more notably, the first appearance of Itchy in Steamboat Itchy, which, true story, Al Jean and Mike Reese referred to in the Simpsons writing room as Steamboat Lawsuit, because they were absolutely convinced that there was no way this was going to make it to air, and they were just waiting and waiting for it to get pooled, but for some reason it just never did. They skirted the line.
It's literally like up until a certain point, like a shot-for-shot remake of Steamboat Willie.
They do a lot to make it very similar. I mean, obviously, Mickey Mouse doesn't dismember a cat halfway through the movie, but maybe
for those trivia fans out there, keep in mind that the first cartoon with Scratchy was in 1928, and they say a year later was Steamboat Itchy. So you got those random Simpsons trivia nights out there. That's a good question.
We also got a time period during the 1940s when Itchy and Scratchy stopped killing each other so they could team up to fight a much more evil foe. None other than Hitler himself. They destroyed him in an Itchy and Scratchy manner, with a little help from FDR, of all people, coming in to give the final boot.
And then we go back to regular Itchy and Scratchy seconds later, where after they kill Hitler, Itchy decapitates Scratchy. What I really enjoyed about that cartoon was the very end when Itchy held up the sign that said "Save Scrap Metal," because for all the history buffs, that was like a huge deal during World War II. It's especially here in because of here in the U.S. where they needed all kinds of scrap metals so they could keep building everything military wise, and so like that was actually there were actually signs all the time made back then. People going down the street saying "Save scrap metal" and stuff just for the war effort. So that was cool that they tied that in. You have to know about it, or you're just like, I don't get it.
Yeah, there was a lot of things being recalled back then, that anything they could do to get more metal for the war, and that was a fun little tie-in. Another neat fact about that animation segment is they wanted to draw it in a unique style to make it stand out and be very different from the normal Itchy and Scratchy, and they ended up liking that style so much that it went on to become the inspiration for how the Critic was drawn, that series that we'll be getting to a bonus episode on at some point down the road. But I thought that was this was the initial inspiration for the art style.
Honestly, when I was watching the 1940s Itchy and Scratchy, it reminded me of Tom and Jerry when I was seeing it.
That makes sense. I could see that too. It flashes back, and it seems that this broadcast has been being viewed by both Bart and Lisa this entire time, going back through the history of the movies, or the show being made and how it came to be a movie. And partway through, we notice that Maggie just kind of gets up and leaves the scene, but Bart and Lisa are still glued to the television. A while later, Homer comes in and says, "Boy, didn't I tell you to watch your sister?" And Bart says, "That sounds like something you would say." But regardless, she's gone. She is taken off. And this is when we see a glimmer of something we haven't had in a while, Rich, because we don't count Halloween episodes, but I think there may have been a little magical Maggie at play in this. What do you think?
I think at the conclusion of it, it may start off magical, but there's no magic at the end. It's all Jedi power at the end. The way airbags deploy, especially on a baby, there is no way Maggie survives that without having like an anti-force going against the airbag.
I just love that she it just basically turns into like a little bed for her. It's adorable, actually.
I love the fact that she drives past Marge, and Marge just looks and is like, "What?"
I like Wiggum's reaction, dude. Wiggum is the absolute best. Oh, a baby driving a car. Oh, and look over there. There's a dog driving a bus.
Yeah. Which, to be fair, if you're Wiggum, like, which one do you go after first? I guess the
baby? No question, I would say.
But who's on the bus with the dog? What if it's a whole bus full of babies?
Oh, a bus full of people,
bus
man.
Full of babies.
The greater good.
Yeah.
Ooh, I didn't think about the greater good, man. I was too quick to react. I instinctively, you know what? I think Maggie was using her magical powers to influence me there.
That would be Jedi powers that influence your mind.
The bottom line is losing Maggie is enough that Homer has finally had it, and the boy will be punished. And punished he was. I've said it before, just getting ready to talk about this episode. The punishment that Bart takes in this episode, I think, would be the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And I realize how privileged my life must be for that to be the case. But holy shit, dude. You and I mentioned it earlier. A large part of our friendship through the years has been going to see movies. We both love movies. We go and see midnight, releases every week for the most part. It used to be every time we go to a midnight release and see the absolute premiere. As our work schedule has changed and whatnot, we've been doing morning matinees on Fridays. But bottom line is we love movies. And I know there are certain movies that come out. I mean, trying to think back, just certain ones. Like, any of the Star Wars movies that have come out would be up there. Many of the Marvel movies, absolutely the Harry Potter movies, but there's so many of these movies that I would just be so broken over not getting to see. It would kill me.
But again, my issue with this is I honestly think this is the best parenting Homer will ever do on the show. And it's because, I'll get into this again at the end of the episode, there's very specific reasons why that I will detail for everybody. But you know, we've already seen in the earlier parts of the episode that Homer, in this episode at least, is very caring and on Bart's side and sticking up for him. So it's so much more meaningful that it's him having to be the bad guy and actually standing by it here. Because if Marge did it, you'd be like, well, of course Bart's going to listen, it's Marge. But this is such a bigger deal because most people expect Homer to break and cave. And it's almost like his pride gets in the way a little bit so that he's not going to. But at the same time, he's shown that he really cares about Bart throughout this entire episode, more than he should, maybe. So, like, it's much more meaningful that it's Homer's decision to do this. And he straight up rips the tickets in half that Bart probably spent his own allowance money on.
Dude, and that's a hard scene to watch. Like, you can kind of see Bart's, like, soul being crushed as the pieces of the ticket fall to the floor.
That's the only thing that of value that Bart had that could have that kind of effect on him. And that's the cool, like, back and forth of this episode, is that it builds that up and then takes it away.
I think this even contributes to your point even more, that Lisa actually stands up on her own for Bart, not being coaxed. Her immediate reaction is to defend her brother. She actually says, Dad, this is the defining moment of our generation. I mean, what would you have thought if somebody told you couldn't watch the moon landing? And, of course, I love that they show a flashback of Homer during the moon landing, and he was too busy jamming out in his beanbag chair to care. But one thing to note, they actually used the real audio from the moon landing, but they did, I really appreciated their joke on the commentary, actually. They talked about how they had to cut it down a little bit because Neil Armstrong has terrible comedic timing. It doesn't work, though. Lisa's pleas fall on deaf ears, and Homer has his foot down, and he means it this time. When we get to the opening day, I wanted to point out, I saw the opening line up front was Milhouse and Martin. I'm sure that Bart would have been there with him had he been allowed to go. I thought it was interesting that Ned Flanders was there with either Todd or Rod. I'm not sure.
According to my guidebook, it's Rod Flanders.
I assume he's reading him a book. I'm assuming it's got to be the Bible, but they're actually second in line, even though it seems that Otto camped out overnight and is only in third. Finally, we get Abe and Jasper looking like they're playing chess, and in the background, I also noticed Lionel Hutz and the band director were the only other characters I was able to identify.
But this just shows that it's going to be a huge movie, so it's something everybody wants to see. Even freaking Flanders. And one last thing from the commentary on this one, a fun fact that I just really enjoyed, especially going back to what I said about the two of us and our enjoyment of doing this very thing.
The Simpsons writers actually used to, together as a staff, go to movie premieres. They'd love to go to movies on opening day and see it as a big group and talk about it and all that good stuff. And the first two movies that they actually did this for were none other than 1989's Batman. Just around the corner from that, we had T2 Judgment Day.
Oh, wow. That's
the
really
best
cool.
Terminator movie by far.
What I like is that it pans across the crowd of people, and when it gets past all the known characters, it's just a sea of people. And then when it gets to the bridge, I think this is the first time they use this line, and everyone knows this line now, but the bridge that goes up and down in the middle, there's a guy in the middle, and as the bridge goes up, he falls down into the water going, I regret nothing!
Yeah. But he did stand in a really poor place.
Yeah, but he regrets it. He doesn't regret it, I mean. I love that line. Yeah, I've said that line for years and years and years.
The worst part about all this, though, is of all the places the line could end in town, it ends directly in front of Bart's window. Homer is trying to comfort Bart because he can see how upset he is, and he says to the boy, why don't you find something to watch on TV? Bart replies that TV sucks, and you can see a visceral reaction from Homer where he starts to get pissed off, but he says under, gritted teeth, I know you're upset right now, boy, so I'm going to let that one slide.
Well, this whole little interchange between Bart and Homer is really funny, and this was always on Songs in the Key of Springfield, the CD I used to have. So I may butcher this because I didn't write it down, but I heard it so many times that it stuck in my brain, where Homer's telling Bart a story of a time where he didn't get what he wanted, and Homer's like, I really wanted a bike, and my parents didn't get one for me. So I held my breath until I passed out and banged my head on the coffee table. The doctor said I might have brain damage. And Bart's like, Dad, what's the point of this story? And Homer goes, I like stories.
I wonder if that was before or after the crayon.
I actually had that exact thought, too.
Yeah. Bart decides, since the TV isn't working, that nothing can compete with the imagination of a young child, but all he can manage to do is to get Itchy and Scratchy standing around waiting to do something, it would seem. They start tapping their watch and looking around bored. Lisa walks in the door having just seen the movie, and there is a great, great joke here. Lisa starts to tell Bart, oh, it wasn't that great. You didn't miss anything. But Bart's like, be honest. And Lisa starts to gush about how it was the best movie in the world she's ever seen, the greatest thing, greatest day of life, blah, blah, blah. And the joke that I absolutely love, she said that Dustin Hoffman and Michael Jackson were both in the movie. They didn't use their real names, but you could totally tell it was them. And as we know, anybody who knows The Simpsons or has followed along with Best Darn Diddly through our first 4 seasons, Michael Jackson and Dustin Hoffman are to date the only 2 guest stars to ever use pseudonyms when they came on the show.
What clever writing.
Bart's tried everything. He even tries to read the novelization and just realizes it's not working. He has a weird little encounter with Nelson and Milhouse. The Nelson part's normal, but the Milhouse part's a little strange because Milhouse basically says he's seen the movie 13 times. Nelson says he's seen it 17. And Bart tries to play it down a bit by saying, oh man, you guys must be getting really bored of that by now. And Milhouse, of all people, replies, anybody who's seen the movie wouldn't have said something like that. And they both start kind of chasing him down as if they're going to beat him up.
Get him! That adds to the punishment of it, if you think about it, though. Like, having to see how much everyone loves the movie.
Oh, that's the worst part. You feel like you've missed out. Yeah, the movie's probably not even that great. It's just the feeling of being left out that is absolute torture.
And meanwhile, they keep telling Homer, like, maybe you should let off on the punishment.
Yeah, there's a scene where Marge and Lisa actually come to Homer after it's been several weeks, and they're like, hey, we need to talk to you. I think it's time that, you let this go. He's been punished enough.
And then Homer brings up the fact that he wants Bart to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he says, what great men he would join. John Marshall, Charles Evans Hughes, Warren Burger. Burger.
So Homer's standing tough. There is one final attempt by Bart to get into the movie, but unfortunately there is a sign in the ticket box saying, do not sell tickets to this boy. It has a picture of Bart. So Bart can't see it. It's now 8 months later, 9 Academy Awards later, and the movie is finally leaving theaters, which an 8-month run, that's pretty goddamn impressive.
Usually, a good movie that's making money usually lasts about 4 months. Sometimes the Oscar winners get a little bit different, or get like put back into theaters for a few months. But yeah, that's pretty impressive.
One last little visual joke I loved is they changed that bleeding billboard we talked about earlier with Scratchy getting decapitated to a Springfield Barber College billboard. But the great part is that the billboard still bled this time because the student barber was cutting somebody's ears.
Yeah. I was still cutting off the whole head.
Maybe it was, yeah. It was a good little joke, yeah. But you can get a hell of a deal on a haircut there.
Mm-hmm.
You know how much I need those. Finally, Bart is defeated. He says to Homer, "You've won." But Homer replies, "No, son, we've both won. You don't realize it yet, but we've put you on the start to greatness." And that's when we cut to 40 years in the future. Homer and Bart are walking down the street together. Bart is clearly a supreme justice, and they walk by the theater, and they see that they're having classics of animation with Itchy and Scratchy the Movie and Beauty and the Beast.
What I love is that in 40 years from then, movie theater tickets cost $650 for 2.
Dough! Right after, they find that out after Homer offers to pay. They also, though, is the first 50 tickets purchased do come with free Glexnor for what that's worth. And you can get a big old bucket of Soylent Green at the concession stand now.
What I think is funny is they had a few like Native American jokes earlier in the episode. The ice cream truck had to change their name to Native American instead of like Chief something or other. And I love that it's the Aztec Theater, which isn't that is just in Indian. I'm sorry, which the Aztec Theater is now selling Soylent Green. So I don't know if they're like trying to give the Native Americans their own little swing back at people throughout the episode, but it made me laugh a little bit.
That's so random, but yeah, I hear you're going with that.
Yeah. I don't know. It just they went both ways with it.
There's a quick nod to Mystery Science Theater as the silhouettes of Homer and Bart slide into the screen as we see Itchy and Scratchy the Movie loading up, and we actually get a little bit of the movie itself. It's an all right little bit. I don't think it was worth all the fuss that Bart's friends were putting on about it, but it seemed like it entertained. We'll say.
I mean, it's only 53% new footage.
True. They did say on the commentary the writers kind of tossed the idea back and forth on if they should show any of the movie or not. And originally they did not show anything, but they felt that the audience were left unsatisfied. So
that's a very good point.
The ending in.
The whole time you're like, oh man, I really want Bart to see this movie. And like, I think it shows a lot more of the relationship between Bart and Homer, even because they show a little bit of the movie.
Yeah, I think it's a very sweet moment, to say the least, because, I mean, at the end of the day, to your point earlier about this is Homer's shining moment of parenting, and this is the reward for all of that, for all of the angst and for all of the sadness and for how painful it was for Bart not to see that film. Homer saw the big picture, and he actually sacrificed, even though it was more difficult, because again, a lot of times Homer is only a bad parent because he's lazy, and he actually had to try hard in this episode in order to keep that punishment intact.
Which Mrs. K is the one that first mentioned Supreme Court justice, and that's the idea that stuck in Homer's head throughout the whole thing. And I love the last little moment there where he goes, "Which one's the mouse?" And Bart's like, "Itchy." And Homer goes, "Itchy's a jerk." And Bart just goes, "Yeah."
Totally. Great moment.
This is my final thought here that I want to put out there into podcast land. We have lots of episodes that take place in the future on The Simpsons. And Bart's always in a terrible spot. He's always the guy that has nothing going for him and is being too lazy and all this stuff. But I had a thought while I was watching this. This episode actually says 40 years later and fast forward into the future. I think most of the episodes that take place in the future on The Simpsons are all like when Lisa's seeing the fortune teller, and it's always things that are probable futures. This episode clearly shows this is what happens in the future. So like they do all this stuff where Bart's a degenerate later on in life, but I don't think we ever really get to where he's super old. Like he'd only be 50 on this. But like this one makes it clear that this is the actual future. So that means that like Homer was right. Homer did the best parenting possible here. and it actually worked. So I want to pay attention in the future and see if any of the episodes that flash forward actually are not just possibilities, but they're saying this actually happened, because it just clicked with me where a lot of times it's just possible futures, but this is an actual future.
That's a really interesting point you make, and I want to bring up that Matt Groening himself was actually upset about that very fact. He thought that this did not paint it in a dreamlike setting enough. He wanted it to be less obviously the future and more a possible future, I guess you could say.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that was something that kind of irked Matt Groening at first when this scene was first shot. They apparently tried to add a few things in, like the flying cars and things of that nature, to make it seem a little bit more far-fetched, but ultimately the fan reception of it was exactly what you just said. And I still completely agree that when I watch this episode, the way I see this is Bart does, in fact, become a Supreme Court justice, and this is the future. He sees Itchy and Scratchy the movie, and maybe stayed for Beauty and the Beast. That part's unclear. But he definitely sees that movie with his dad 40 years from whatever air date this is, in the weird Simpsons universe that time doesn't exist. So that part is interesting, too.
But I like the fact that you think that that's what really does happen in the future. Like
it's a really nice moment for Bart and Homer for that matter.
It's
but
I think it's a better moment for Homer. Like, that lesson is what changes Bart, and that means that Homer did the right thing. And how often can you say that about Homer? He did the right thing for the right reasons instead of the other way around.
And that's beautiful, man. That's beautiful. And that is the end of Itchy and Scratchy the movie. Richie, was there anything else that you or that book of yours wanted to bring up before we get on out of here?
The only thing we didn't mention from my guidebook, The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family, I did not catch this while we were watching it, but when it goes 40 years into the future and they're outside the theater, there is still a "do not sell to this boy" picture, and it's still of Bart as a child.
I actually noticed that. That's absolutely hilarious that that's still sitting in that booth that I'm sure hasn't been remodeled at all in the last 40 years.
Yeah.
Very cool. And I really don't have anything else to add on this one either. It still stands up as one of my favorite episodes. I very much enjoy it, and I think it's an early contender for my top 5 of the season coming up for our finale this time. But let's be honest, they're all contenders in my eyes, so that doesn't really say much.
Yeah, and that's still 18 episodes away? 16
yeah, no, we've got a long way to go here. This is very early in the season, but I've always been very fond of this one. I don't like it as much as Itchy and Scratchy Land when it comes to Itchy and Scratchy themed episodes. I still think this is a very solid episode.
What Itchy and Scratchy episode is better than Itchy and Scratchy Land? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a good point. None. Good point. That's going to do it for this week's Best Darn Diddly Review Show. Richie, what do you want to plug this week?
As always, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at theWiz_kid23. Also, while you're on Twitter, go ahead and go to our show page. That's at Best Darn Diddly. That's DIDDLY. Make sure you give us a follow on there. Also, go on YouTube and check out MrMostDaysOff's YouTube channel. It's literally MrMostDaysOff, all one word. And watch us do our live streams of games like Friday the 13th, which is a hell of a lot of fun.
We also sometimes do Rocket League, and we never do Call of Duty, but we should start. We sometimes have some fun on that.
We swear a lot when we play Call of Duty.
It's an uncensored channel. It's all good. Check me out at MrMostDaysOff on Twitter and Instagram. And wrestling fans, go over to voicesofwrestling.com, where Chris Novembrino and I are going to be starting up with Lucha of the Hidden Temple again, our weekly review of Lucha Underground. Check that out on Voices of Wrestling. Other than that, we look forward to coming back with you next week to talk about Marge Gets a Job.
I regret nothing.
Until next time, be cromulent to each other.